All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of base jumping.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're tackling a topic that'll make even the bravest jumper's palms sweat tension knots.
Right.
Those moments when your parachute lines decide to get all tangled up, turning a thrilling jump into, well, a potential disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. A nightmare scenario.
Luckily, we have an incredible guide for this dive. A base jumping veteran with, wait for it, 27 years of experience.
Wow.
And that's not all, folks. He's also a skydiving expert with a mind-blowing 43 years under his belt.
That is a wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely. So he knows a thing or two about keeping those parachutes happy.
Yeah, he's seen it all, I'm sure.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's start with the basics. What exactly is tension knot, and why is it the ultimate base jumping nightmare?
Well, imagine this. You've taken the leap, you're free falling, the ground's rushing up, and you pull your chute.
Heart's pounding.
Adrenaline's pumping. But instead of that beautiful whoosh of a clean deployment, the lines, they tangle up. They form a knot near the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this prevents the parachute from inflating properly. So you're left with a partially open chute. Or, even worse, no chute at all.
That's terrifying. And the thing is, according to our expert, this isn't some freak accident.
Right.
He says that most base jumpers with like 7 or 8 years of experience, they've probably encountered this at least once.
That's a real risk.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of if, it's when. And that's pretty scary stuff.
It is, and it's something all base jumpers need to be aware of.
Definitely. Now, I've heard that twisted steering lines are often blamed for tension knots, but our expert, he never really bought into that theory, right?
No, he didn't. He's always believed it's way more complex than just, twisted lines.
Right.
He says it's like focusing on a single tree when what you really need to see is the entire forest.
Yeah, the bigger picture.
To really understand tension knots, you've got to look at skydiving, base jumping, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so a wider lens, definitely. Now, let's take a step back in time for a moment. Early base canopies, they were essentially modified skydiving parachutes, weren't they?
That's right. Back then, they would take a 7-cell skydiving canopy, remove the deployment bag, sew on a tail pocket,
Interesting.
lengthen the bridle, add a larger pilot chute, reinforce a few areas, and boom, there's your base canopy.
Wow, that sounds kind of DIY when you put it that way.
Yeah, it was definitely a simpler time. And back then, things we consider crucial today, things like aspect ratio, line attachment geometry, bridle attachment, they weren't really a big focus. Back then, they were mainly focused on, the trim and the brake settings.
So when did things start to shift? When did our expert get involved in solving this whole tension knot mystery?
Well, his journey started back in '93 when he teamed up with Ater, a Slovenian base canopy manufacturer. He started using their canopies to, test out his theories.
To put them to the test.
Yeah, literally. And this is where it gets really exciting. He got together with what they called the Slovenian Base Gang.
The Slovenian base camp.
Yeah. They did some serious testing. We're talking like 2,500, maybe even 3,000 jumps.
Whoa, that's a lot of jumps.
That's dedication.
They were committed. So they weren't just sitting around theorizing. They were out there actually putting their lives on the line. Right?
Exactly. They were determined to make the sport safer.
And that's really commendable. So let's talk solutions. Our expert, he identified several areas to target when it comes to tension knots. First up, repositioning the bridle attachment point.
This is really important for manufacturers and riggers to understand. Now, the bridle attachment point, that's where your pilot chute connects to the parachute lines.
Right.
And he found that on most base canopies, this point is positioned too far forward towards the canopy's leading edge.
Okay, now why is that an issue? Like, help me visualize this.
Okay, imagine holding a bed sheet by its corners. If you pull the front corners tighter, what happens? The middle sags.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, it kind of dips down.
exactly. It's the same with parachute lines. When that bridle attachment point is too far forward, it creates this uneven tension during opening. The front lines get pulled taut, but the rear risers, those lines connected to the back of your harness, they end up just hanging loose.
So instead of all the lines stretching out evenly, you have slack in the rear lines.
Precisely. And those loose lines, along with the steering lines, they're just flapping around during deployment.
Oh, I see.
Creates a real mess, ripe for a tension knot.
Like trying to fold a fitted sheet. Right.
Exactly.
It never ends well.
It's chaotic.
Okay, that makes sense. But then it makes me wonder, why don't reserve parachutes have this problem? I mean, they deploy in a similar way, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's
Uh,
something he thought about too. But the key difference is in how they deploy. With reserves, the lines come out of a free bag, and once they're fully extended, the bag is gone, equal tension remains, and no bridle is involved.
Uh-huh. So it's that bridle that's throwing things off in base canopies.
Right. So the solution, you need to move that bridle attachment point
Move it where?
right smack in the middle of the A, B, and CD line groups. That way you have even tension across all the lines.
Okay, I got it.
And when Antair tested this on a prototype Vision canopy, the results were incredible, like night and day.
Wow, so a small tweak can make a huge difference.
Absolutely, especially in base jumping where safety is paramount.
Totally. Okay, that's one solution down. What's next on our experts list?
So next on the list is the double rubber band technique for the primary stow.
Okay, the primary stow. That's how we pack our parachute lines.
Yeah.
Always feels a bit like origami to me.
Yeah.
One wrong fold and disaster. So what's the common thinking about primary stows?
Well, a lot of base jumpers believe a larger loop in the primary stow helps keep those lines from, slipping out.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Bigger loop, more holding power.
Right. More surface area, better grip. But our expert, he sees things a little differently.
Oh, how so?
He says that, and this might sound counterintuitive, a larger loop actually makes the hanging lines problem worse.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Okay, think about it like this. You're trying to bundle a bunch of pencils together with a rubber band. If you make a big loop with the rubber band, the pencils in the middle, they stick out further than those held tight at the edges.
Ah, I see.
Same with parachute lines. A larger loop means the lines in the middle, those most likely to slip out, they end up longer than those held firmly on the outside.
Okay, so it's not just about holding the lines securely, it's about keeping them all roughly the same length.
Exactly. Even tension is key.
Got it. So what does our expert do?
For Spectra lines, he uses 2 micro bungees, double wrapped.
Double wrapped?
Yep, for extra security. And for Dacron lines, 2 big rubber bands, also double wrapped.
He's really serious about those rubber bands.
Yeah, well, Dacron lines, they tend to get a bit furry over time.
Furry.
Yeah, from wear and tear, making them more prone to tangling. Those double-wrapped rubber bands add that extra bit of grip to keep them in check.
Okay, furry lines. Got it. Makes sense. Now, we've talked about the bridle attachment and primary stow. What else does he recommend?
Now, this is where things get a little controversial.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a fan of using slider gates, tailgates, or even masking tape to try and center the parachute lines during a slider-up base jump.
Wait, seriously? I thought those were like standard practice.
Yeah, a lot of base jumpers use them, but he believes they're unnecessary and can actually interfere with the force distribution during deployment.
Interesting. But does he have any evidence to back that up? I mean, people have been using slider gates for a while now.
Oh, absolutely. Remember those 360-degree cameras?
Yeah, the ones that capture the whole jump.
They provide clear evidence that slider gates aren't doing what people think they are. You can see exactly what happens with the lines in the slider.
Wow, so the cameras are actually showing us what's really going on.
Exactly. It's like having a slow motion replay of the entire deployment.
Okay, so slider gates are out. What about the, what did they call it? The rubber band trick?
You mean attaching bands to the center lines and wrapping them onto the slider?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, he tested that too.
And
Just as ineffective as the other methods.
so it's all about understanding how the equipment is designed to work and not trying to overcomplicate things.
Right. Trust the design, focus on the fundamentals.
Got it. What else is on the list?
All right. Next up, slider size.
The slider, that little square of fabric that controls the parachute's opening.
That's the one.
I always thought you just picked a slider based on, your canopy size.
A lot of people think that, but it's not that simple. He compares it to buying shoes based only on your foot length. You might end up with blisters.
Ouch. Yeah, I see what he means. So what else do you need to consider?
Your body ergonomics, the type of risers you use, even the design of the canopy.
Okay, so it's all got to work together.
Exactly. And when in doubt, he says go with a slightly larger slider.
Really? Bigger is better.
In this case, yeah. It might seem counterintuitive, but a slightly larger slider will generally lead to a smoother and, more importantly, a safer opening.
Interesting. So better to have a slider that's a bit too big than one that's too small and restricts the opening?
Precisely. It's about minimizing those variables. Every little decision you make, from the slider size to how you pack your lines, it all adds up.
Okay, we've talked about bridle points, primary stow techniques, the slider gate debate, and slider size. What's the final piece of the puzzle? Okay, we've covered so much in this deep dive, from bridle attachment points to slider sizes, and it's really eye-opening how many things affect a safe parachute deployment. What's the final piece of this tension knot puzzle we're putting together?
The last piece, and this is where things get really interesting, is the pilot chute.
The pilot chute.
Yeah, specifically how the size of the pilot chute interacts with speed and the force of the opening. This is especially important now with, wingsuits and tracking, those techniques becoming so popular.
Right, so jumpers are hitting higher speeds than ever before when they pull their chutes. Does that mean the pilot chute has to work harder? Like, could that lead to a more chaotic opening, increasing the chances of a tension knot?
That's what he's thinking. He believes those higher speeds, yeah, at pull time, they might increase the chances of a tension knot just because there's more energy involved and more potential for things to get messed up.
Makes sense to me. It's like trying to untangle a knot while someone's shaking the rope, right?
Mhm.
More chaos, more chance of things getting really tangled.
Exactly. And that's why he's such a big advocate for picking the right pilot chute size. Don't just assume one size fits all. Think about it like a 40-inch pilot chute on a small canopy. That would create a crazy strong opening, way more force than needed, and that could lead to a really wild deployment.
Yikes, no thanks. So it sounds like we need to understand how all the parts of our base jumping system work together, from a canopy to the pilot chute, and factor in things like speed and opening force.
Absolutely. It's a holistic approach to safety. You can't just focus on one thing. It's about understanding how it all works together.
Throughout this whole deep dive, I've been so impressed with our experts' willingness to challenge what everyone thinks. Like his skepticism about slider gates and his very specific way of packing. It reminds us all to always question things and look for evidence, especially in a sport as risky as base jumping.
He embodies a crucial mindset for any base jumper, which is to never stop learning and testing and refining your understanding. I mean, that's what pushes the sport forward
Right.
and makes it safer for everyone.
Totally. And speaking of knowledge, he also mentioned another area for research, the connection between body position at deployment and tension knots.
Yeah, he's noticed that jumpers who are, in a less symmetrical body position when they deploy, like maybe a little off-heading or with a slight twist, they seem to be more likely to get tension knots.
Now, that is interesting. So could it be that those small asymmetries in body position, they introduce enough instability to increase the risk of a tension knot?
Yeah, that's what he's thinking. And it makes sense intuitively, right? If the lines are already under a bit of uneven tension because of how the jumper is positioned, well, it just makes it more likely they'll tangle up during those first few moments of deployment.
It's crazy to think that something so subtle could have such a big impact. Imagine if we could, like, develop training techniques to help jumpers stay more symmetrical and stable during deployment. That could be huge for safety.
Absolutely. That kind of research has the potential to really change things, make the sport safer.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities. This deep dive has been amazing. We've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of tension knots, explored solutions to reduce the risk, and even gotten a glimpse into the future of base jumping safety research.
It all comes back to knowledge, right? In base jumping, where there's so little room for error, knowledge can be the difference between a safe, thrilling jump and something much worse.
I couldn't agree more. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing his insights, and to you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing those boundaries, but always, always with safety in mind. Until next time, blue skies and happy jumps.